Hey guys, welcome to Conversations. I am excited about today. We've already been having some great conversations, so we're going to pull you into a part of this. This is my friend Bonnie Chavda.
Hello.
Bonnie, thanks for coming.
We love you. We love your mission, your vision, but mostly we're family, and it's wonderful to get to be together face to face and see what the Lord has manifest around you, this flourishing that is happening right now. And I don't know if there's anything more beautiful than to see the actual manifestation of a long-held vision from God that has been bathed in prayer and sacrificed for a great deal, and to see it so beautifully and joyfully coming into being. It's great.
Thank you. Yeah, we love you. It's so good. I've told people a couple times after John Paul passed away, we're having conversations with you and Mahesh, and you're like, we're adopting you. I'm like, yes, please. I like this.
Yeah,
no,
we're a
really,
family.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. Really appreciate you. So I have a heart to see the prophetic become all that it's intended. And I know that's something that you really have a passion for, if you will. And I can remember being at the Convergence Council where we first met and just hearing your heart. It's like, okay, are we going to have another conversation? Are we going to do something that's going to bring about some change? Let's try to bring about. And so I want to infuse the prophetic to whatever extent I'm allowed to with some pathways to health and pathways to maturity. Mm-hmm. And we were just talking about somebody that you're mentoring and just the need for the cross. And why don't you kind of take us in that direction a little bit?
Well, obviously the cross is what it's called, the crux. the X marks the spot, and it's more than just a personal salvic moment. It literally is what happened, the God event that happened in the cosmos. And I don't know that our conversations, our Bible teaching, our doctrines even, have been very holistic about the event of the cross. I think that it may be more perceived as just this individual matter of a moment where you decide that you believe in Jesus, and that's what the cross is, and that's what the cross means. But that certainly is not. It's absolutely necessary, but that certainly, the reason it's necessary is because what happened at the cross was literally the restart, the re-beginning of God's creation. That first mission, first vision, first relationship that he had when he created man in his image and likeness and placed them in a garden that he had prepared with all of the richness for that relationship between God and his man and his man and his creation, for that to flourish and cover the whole earth. And obviously it didn't get very far.
Yes.
But the cross is that event. The re-beginning event of God, the Logos, Jesus Christ incarnate, speaking into this mortal universe of ours, and into the whole earth. And something ended cosmically, and something was broken open, and that was where the generations of the powers of darkness taking captive God's creation, particularly the human race, but also, the virus of death that entered into creation itself. And as beautiful as our natural world is, as stunning and marvelous, and so such a voice of who God is in so many ways, what we see around us, even in nature, is a broken version that is doomed for death. And, we've all been captured by the beauty of natural landscapes and the mystery and wonder of nature and all that. But to think that even that glory is a marred version. But what happened at the cross was the recovery, the beginning of the recovery. And it's beautiful, and it's a mystery, isn't it, where it says in Scripture that when Jesus ascended with his offering, he sat down at the right hand of God, and he will reign. That's talking about present tense. And he is the ultimate, utter potentate, the sovereign.
Yeah.
There is no one, no principality, power, angel, demon, man, human, government that has any power beyond him. And yet we see in our natural mortal world around us, so many things that seem to have so much more power than Jesus, who is presently reigning. But it says he will reign until all things are put under his feet. And I think that the prophetic and the cross enter into this reality, and that it's something that the church needs to pay attention to and grasp in a new way. We have just embarked on a lengthy series of conversations in our community, revisiting the Apostles' Creed. And it's pretty stunning how much of the basic Christian foundations the average Christian who has believed in the cross and has embraced the cross don't have the realities of what that means actually functioning in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing about the cross. So this last Sunday was Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
And I was talking about the resurrection. So the whole thing is about the cross. And this idea, the cross is an instrument of death. We're looking for this new birth, this resurrection life to be released. You can't resurrect something that's not dead. The only way that something can come into the new life is for it to die. And so Jesus, being the first fruits, he died, and with him, all of creation now has the potential to come under that authority, but he's given things to other people's authority. We've been given authority over the earth. And so if we don't subject our authority to him, then what's under our authority doesn't get that potential, which is why all creation is longing and groaning, waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. But that understanding of the requirement of a death for there to be a resurrection, I think is got to be key to, we'll go specifically into prophetic training. What's died? If something hasn't died, there's not resurrection life in it. Well, I've had this gift since I was a child. Okay, but did that gift die? Well, no, I'm exploring this. No, there's a problem. That's going to be a polluted use of the gift, guaranteed, because it has not gone through the cross. The only way it gets purified is to go through the cross. And we've missed that because we're trying to figure out how to fulfill our potential in the wrong way. Not fulfill our potential of what God created us to do and be so that we can accomplish his purposes, but to fulfill our potential so that we can feel like we're okay with ourselves. And that is at the root of much of the unhealthiness, because we don't really understand the cross. We don't value it.
Do you think that part of that is a misconception about the cross being a kind of bondage, when in fact what it is, specifically because of what you said, of the reality of the end, the dying of everything, the cross is the ultimate moment of liberation.
Yeah.
Because all of those other things have died in Christ. And, I think about in his resurrection, the people who knew him didn't recognize him. And he was in a physical body. Mm-hmm. And he says specifically, flesh and bones. Immortal, flesh and bones. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And it was when he spoke, suddenly the person they knew as Jesus was immediately before them. Or, when that, like with the two guys on the road to Emmaus talking about the scriptures, and obviously they had a paradigm and they knew the scriptures and they had seen this event that had happened in Jerusalem, and they were, hearing everything that was happening. And yet the one was walking on the road with them. And I mean, Jesus he's sneaky. He's sneaky. That in so many of those instances, the resurrection one, honestly, if we could be back there, I think there was a great deal of humor, frankly, involved in it. Seriously.
Like when they weren't looking, the little smirk on his face. Like,
I mean, the gardener,
fun.
right? And he just lets it go along until, he speaks, and then suddenly that his person is there that makes the physical appearance of him become who he is. In the eye of the beholder. I don't want to get too esoteric about that, but eating, he did a lot of eating.
Yeah,
he cooked, but they didn't recognize him. People who knew him didn't recognize him.
Because we're still looking at the flesh. We're still looking at the appearance of things. We're still doing what Samuel did. Don't look at how tall he is, how attractive he is, how strong he is. Listen to his reputation. You're looking at the appearance of things, but God looks at the heart of a matter. And we're being retrained in how to stop looking at the appearance of things and looking at the heart of things, which is core to the prophetic function. I believe that's one of the great values that the prophetic is supposed to bring to the church, is to help the church to be able to see past the appearance of something into the heart of something, to see what really is going on. Because until we see to the heart, we can't understand what's actually happening. We've got to be able to look beyond the appearance of things. And so in the resurrection, it's not the appearance that has any value, though it's there. It's the heart of the matter. And when the heart is revealed through the mouth speaking, it comes to manifestation.
I want to tell you something that is pretty crazy. This happened in one of our conferences sometime in the last couple of years. And, it was one of those moments where the real presence is just so tangible if you're somewhat accustomed to recognizing the presence of the Lord and in the worship and all of the stuff that was happening. And in a moment, suddenly, you know how it works. It's like a camera shutter, which they call a kairos, which is interesting. But with the camera shutter opened, and I saw Jesus sitting on our platform in our church, receiving in the midst of this amazing worship and just the atmosphere that was there with the word and everything. And he was sitting there on our platform. And it shocked me. Do you know why? Because I literally saw him the size that he actually is right now. Because if that man, the resurrected man that ascended, is the same guy, unless there was some incredible other transformation of his physical resurrected body, which I think would negate everything about him being our high priest, the entire thing would be,
right.
It wouldn't be.
It must be physical.
One of us, John, sits on that throne. One of us, John, one of us sits on that throne. And the thing that was stunning for me is he was about the size and stature of one of the medium-sized guys in our church. And I just never had those thoughts before. I mean, I've been walking with the Lord for 45, 48, 50 years. Wow. And I had to see it in a vision, I guess. Talk about the spirit of prophecy.
Right.
To get a jar and a kind of a sea change in whatever was in there about how I was perceiving him. And it caused me to actually go and start looking at historical things of, how tall would Jesus might likely have been? You know, he wasn't that noticeable, and he wasn't the guy that everybody was like, oh, that's the cutie, we're going after him. You know, he wasn't that guy. And something about that moment, prophetic moment, where I saw a reality that I know as a reality.
Yeah.
And I can prove it by saying, no, he was not anything unusual. He would have blended in with everybody else. Yeah. And that was the resurrected body. And that's the guy sitting on the throne. But the thing, again, that brings it home for me is one of us sits on that throne.
Yeah.
And thinking about the cross, I think that we need to be able to see the cross, if you will, prophetically, as it really is, which was, as you said, it was the moment when everything went quiet.
Yeah.
Everything went black, if you will. Where there was no voice, there was no vision. And I think that is the point of liberation, of opportunity for the prophetic. And I'm not convinced, particularly the American prophetic, and you know, we've had the liberty and opportunity to really grow it and make a lot of noise about it. And of course, within the prophetic community, we have this tendency to think we are the whole world, right? And really, in terms of existent church and Christianity in the world, it's a very thin sliver. It really is a very thin sliver. But all the more, I think, important that it's legitimate. And the American prophetic, in my opinion, was hugely influenced by a crooked foundation. There's just the simple things about prophecy and how you judge it, and you know what's legitimate, and how you interpret it, and how you act on it or don't act on it. The whole thing of considering the vessel themselves, and various other things, and having experienced people be the judges for. Forget all that in the American, prophetic movement. We've got the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could pick up my phone and make a video and prophesy over the nations right now, and nobody can tell me whether or not that was actually the word of the Lord.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you think that one of the healings that will happen is a return of a recapturing of the prophetic, putting a bridle on it, so to speak, and calling it back into some kind of an existential communal context where there are real experienced people. And I'm sorry, not just quote unquote prophets, but apostolic people, teachers, spiritual fathers and mothers that aren't cowed by the power of the prophetic and are experienced in the knowledge of God and in the Word and everything, to be able to speak to the use of it. And maybe I shouldn't bring this up, but I think that the American election cycle was a huge gift from God to the prophetic movement in America to say, hold on. There are some loose threads here that can go nowhere but to greater tear in the fabric of the knowledge of God. And so, anyway, maybe I shouldn't go down that trail. That's enough of that.
But it's true. I think it really is true. I mean, the beautiful thing that we've misunderstood when in the conversation about judgment is that judgment is unto restoration, period. God's judgment is always unto restoration. And he will continue to escalate the judgment until it comes back to that restoration, to the original place, what was intended. And if that means that it's completely gone and gets restarted, he doesn't want to go there, but he will take it that far if it refuses to come back. And I'm actually concerned right now for the prophetic in America that we're going that direction. And if we do not change, that God will reset the prophetic by at one of the convergence councils. I can't remember if it's the one you were at. 3 or 4 different people, John Paul, John Sanford, I can't remember the others, had the same word separately. They hadn't talked to each other beforehand. And they were sharing a revelation. And the word was that the direction, the trajectory of the prophetic in America was in an unhealthy direction. And if it did not change, that God was going to lift his hand from the prophetic, and there would arise a generation that would have no desire to be in prophetic ministry, so that it could be purged of the unhealthiness that had been put into it, and it could come back in a different generation 40 years later in a healthy way.
You know, I think I was there, but I had totally forgotten that. Had totally forgotten that. And there are little pieces of that. Some of these individuals, again, in the event of this election, for instance, some of the individuals that had these very strong and definitive words about what was going to happen, and it didn't happen. And I know there's a lot of conversation about, well, you know, it still can happen, and when did this... You know what? For me, if it's going to be the word of the Lord, you don't have to Monday morning quarterback on it.
Right.
And I think if any of those words would have really been subjected to judgment, to scrutiny, they at least could have maybe been released in a more thoughtful way that wouldn't have created such disaster.
Yeah.
And one of the injustices, in my opinion, is that there were so many of these prophets and so-called prophets that were speaking to an individual who is considered the leader of the free world, and convincing that individual that God was speaking of a certain thing. These are big issues. And even the fact that there was a door for that voice to come into that dynamic is something that is so holy and sacred. And I think that the Lord in his mercy, you know, judgment begins with the household of God. And I honestly, truth is on the line, not just in the church. Truth is on the line in the world.
Yeah.
And again, with globalization, with the proliferation of the internet, and with the rise of just some flat out predatory evil ideas and various things internationally, truth is on the line. And that puts the prophetic in a, if it's going to be anything legitimate.
Right.
At all.
If it's going to be legitimate, it's going to stand for truth, period, which means it's on the line.
It's funny, you know, you talk about judgment, and I heard a fella years ago. I was in a summer school in the UK, and he used this illustration in his message. He took this scene from, and I think he actually was using the movie. I know you're going to groan when I bring this up. I think of you when I think of this moment. But he used the scene from the movie Jane Eyre, where Mr. Darcy comes to her to profess his undying love, that he cannot live without her. And the way that he presents it is he tells her everything that's wrong with her, and all the reasons why he could not, should not, shall not love her, but loves her in spite of all of that. And it's really brilliant. And of course, her response is, well, since you've told me how impossible it is for you to love me, fine, I reject your proposal. And he's utterly shocked that, you know, that she would have rejected him. But I thought it was really brilliant of this speaker. He used that scene to say that love has judgment in it. And he was actually, you know, using, Darcy could have said it a lot better, but he had, you know, he had processed, if you take the character as a real person, he had processed all of these judgments, all of his rationale, all of his, you know, weighing everything about this object of his affection. And all of those things were necessary judgments. And that's the point. We think of God's judgment as that thing that is wrath, that is vengeful, that is removed, that is separated. But that's not the case at all. In fact, it's the opposite of that. And if justice, everybody's talking about justice now. Justice is also on the line. And I personally hate the phrase of social justice because it is an absolutely perverted concept now. It has been used as a, something to punch a ticket to promote certain agendas and this and that and something else. But justice is also on the line. And justice is the only hope of a reprieve for all of the things that are unsettled, that have been done to innocents. And we need justice. The cross is both truth and justice. That's the stunning thing about the event that happened. The utter injustice is the act of God's justice. And in that way, we are justified. All the cases against us have been settled, but justice is on the line. It's important, and I think that we have to start at the cross, and if the church is going to be relevant as it has been in some ages, then its voice has to be an honest voice, a true voice, a voice that is unpolluted and not doctored. And the prophetic is absolutely, absolutely important. But the American prophetic needed a big plumb line to be dropped on its head and tongue. And I think, so that's why I think this event was a blessing.
Yeah, I agree. I've done a lot of study in the use of the word prophetic in different realms of church history and in different segments of the church. So if you go to the Reformation and you look at the word prophetic, at the roots of the Reformation, there were very many clearly prophetic, meaning revelatory, and they valued that, they understood that. But prophetic has become this concept of speaking for God, for them, because the very root of the word prophet is to speak for another, to speak in the face of, the Greek word prophetes, to speak in the face of. So you're speaking from the face of someone else. You are representing their face to someone else, which is, there's so much there in Scripture.
Especially when you're talking about the face of God, right?
The face of God, right? Exactly. Like this is key. But they often will talk about how to be able to be prophetic, you must stand outside. You can't take sides. If you're rooted on this side, you have no right to be prophetic. Boom. If you're rooted on this side, you have no right to be prophetic. You have to stand outside of the sides and be the what's the right, unadulterated, the pure intention of God to communicate, or else you are you're not a righteous witness. You're not an honest prophetic voice.
That's profound. It's so true. So simple, but really that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
That right there, if we just brought that back into, and it comes back to the cross. The cross kills everything. It kills your opinions. It kills your hopes. It kills your dreams. It kills your destiny. It kills everything. And unless he breathes on it, there's no life. And the cross brings you to the place where you, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. That is the fruit of actually coming to the cross. Until you're at that place, you haven't really come to the cross. Anything that you're holding on to that you're not willing to completely surrender, Lord, I know what I want, but whatever you want, into your hands I commit this, whatever this is. It hasn't come to the cross yet.
That's really interesting. It begs the question that we would often hear about what's worth fighting for, right? And then I guess you would have to say, wait a minute, what are you fighting for? And are we assuming certain ends on some of our desires or our perceptions? And I don't want to get too deep about it. I think of two events come to mind as you were talking of the guy that comes to Jesus and he's telling Jesus all the things about their inheritance and his brother this and his brother that, and obviously in that moment you would assume that Jesus could easily have adjudicated that scenario and done it righteously.
Yeah.
And one or the other of those brothers would have been discounted, and yet he simply said, it's not my fight. I have no dog in this fight.
Yeah.
Go figure it out. And it's funny. I thought of Jesus in that moment. And then the other one is when they bring the woman who is caught in adultery. And you had all the factions there. You had the observers, with all the potential for gossip and, scandal and all of that kind of stuff. You had the old religious guys that were supposedly representing the righteous way to adjudicate this thing. You had the guilty party that was there, and apparently the other guilty party was missing. And into that moment, Jesus' silence, wasn't it? His silence that actually
bugs him.
Wasn't it his silence that actually sort of, if you want to say, adjudicated that scenario? And of course, everybody wants to know what he wrote in the dirt.
Right.
But I just think he was scribbling, or I don't know what he was doing. But there was something about his non-response, wasn't it, in that moment?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, he said the one thing, he who has no sin, throw the first stone. And then he just ignores them all. You guys figure it out. You guys figure it out.
That is so scary.
I'm not going to tell you what to do. And that actually goes right to the root of one of the issues of the prophetic. We think that the prophetic is to tell people what to do.
Boom. Yeah. That's it.
And God won't do it. And yet we think we're supposed to.
I think you just clarified this conversation. That was what this conversation was about. It's the assumption that we know what to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the point at which we need to take a couple of steps back into the cross.
Yeah.
And say, Lord, even with all of our experience and all of our knowledge and all of our perspective, maybe we need to be quiet.
Yeah.
And hear your voice again. I think the other aspect is the commercialization of it. And I know back when it began to really become popular in certain constituencies and stuff, it has been connected from day one with buying and selling things, which I don't want to be religious about it. I think that a laborer is worthy of their hire and all of those things I totally agree with. But I have a bit of suspicion that the commercialization of the prophetic has potentially lended itself to becoming easily more a work of the flesh. And that doesn't do anything except just dull its blade.
Yeah. As soon as, Samuel, whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I defrauded in any way? Who has given me something that would influence what I said, and it wasn't the pure word of the Lord? Nobody could stand and speak. I'm afraid that not many people could pass that test today.
Well, and you can understand.
I want to make sure I can. I'm not saying this at them. I'm like, Has there been a time where I made a decision? Because if I actually said this, and I fought the temptation, and I don't think that I have, but I've actually been tempted, and I recognize that temptation. And if we can't admit that, then we're not going to be able to help people.
The thing that I think about is when a prophetic word is some kind of a stark revelation that is true and then comes to pass, right? And honestly, my observation is that the majority of the American prophetic in particular has been more what you would call personal prophetic. But I think therein is one of the huge problems, because you're speaking person to person, face to face, if you will, and saying to a face that is wanting to see the face of God, this is what the Lord is saying to you. And I remember years ago, we had a situation where we were holding a conference. We had a major, legitimate prophetic gift was our main speaker. We had a rising leader in our congregation at that time that had gotten this particular conviction idea in their head. And it was absolutely not the Lord. Everything about it, even morally, was wrong. And that individual was impervious to taking correction. And we had tried in various different ways, short of throwing them out of the church. But they were convinced, and they were going on their way about it. And John, I have to tell you, the moment we experienced in the public meeting with this legitimate, honest prophet standing up and calling that individual out of the crowd and standing them in public in the spotlight and prophesying to them their desire as though it was the word of the Lord, was the most frightening thing that I can remember ever experiencing. But it was such a dynamic and profound example of this thing of the prophetic and refusing the cross, which was the liberator for this individual, but had been utterly refused on the basis of their personal revelation and conviction that agreed with certain desires of their heart that frankly were the flesh. And it had become so twisted. And to have that affirmed to you, that it's absolutely the Lord, what you're thinking, what you're going, and it was absolutely stunning. And myself and some of our other leadership, I'll never forget, as we saw this event going down, looking at one another. At first, it was like, what just happened? And the first thing you would think is like, this is impossible. God could never affirm what this individual is believing and saying. But that wasn't for everybody else.
Right.
It was the judgment of the Lord, literally. And I'm sorry to say, the end of that person, it took a few years, but the end was absolutely devastating, including mental illness, complete psychological breakdown, and devastation. Well, anyway, what a happy note.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so you're here to help out with the Streams Academy, where we just went through Module 2. One of the things we talked about is reading someone's soul, and how to recognize when you're reading someone's soul, when you're hearing someone's stronghold, and then how to respond, because that is so common. Because we think that if we're picking up a random thought that's not in our head, it must be from the Lord. That's a problem.
That's a problem.
Because there's a lot of thoughts that are out there, and some of them are coming from the other person, some of them's coming from the world, some of them's coming from all these sources, and we've gotten okay at separating out the difference between the voice of God and the voice of the devil.
but here's another voice.
But we're really bad at separating out the voice of God from the voice of the soul, unless it's clearly malicious. See, we're still trying to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and call it the tree of life, and too much of our prophetic is coming from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's good to me. Oh, that's got to be the word of the Lord.
Wow. Oh, ouch. But don't you
man.
think that aspect has been one of the problems, and particularly the commercialization of stuff, because then people flock to an individual that is giving good and beautiful words, and especially if they come to pass and stuff, and then that individual's reputation rises, and the whole thing gets established in a funky way.
You tell me all my secret hopes and tell me that I'm really special and that I'm God's gift to the world in the wrong way. I think that's actually true in a way, but I'm like in the wrong way. Like there's theological roots like that.
Are you saying you personally believe this, John? Which you should.
I actually do. I'm not God's ultimate gift to the world, but I am God's gift. But like you tell me all that, and I'm going to think you're amazing, and I'm going to keep coming back for more. Tell me more. Tell me more.
Jesus, help us.
My ears have been tickled. Please do it again.
And then you have to wonder if Jesus is actually or kneeling between the two of them, scribbling on their carpet. It's like, oh.
Yes. Yeah.
You're so awesome. You really are. We appreciate you so much, really. And the love and the honesty and the humility with which you approach the big issues, the big pictures, and the ardent desire that you have for the voice of the Lord to be able to be heard, and to be heard through the supernatural gifts, through the gift of prophecy and dreams, and through revelation, basically, is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
And we certainly have benefited and continue to benefit, especially from our friendship. But we're thankful that you bring all that other stuff with you.
Well, I love you guys. You guys have been such an encouragement. And I mean, the testimony of, you mentioned earlier, you've been a Christian for 45 plus years.
Yeah, actually, it's been a lot longer than that.
The testimony of faithfulness over decades is such a beautiful thing.
I tell you, the cross. We had the cross presented to us from day one, and somehow by the grace of God it landed. And Mahesh and I have never had, honestly, a vision or a mission or an agenda. Somehow it just never mattered. What mattered was to know Jesus, to be known by him, and to be in some way a light into darkness, and a refuge, a balm, a blessing for those that know him.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. I'm honored, and it's just delightful to see you.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the content that you just watched. We are completely listener supported, so if you would like to help us make more great content and get it out there, there's a donate button right here, or you can go to streamsministries.com and click on the donate button. We would love your support, and subscribe to our channel. Let your friends know about us. We want to help people know God and respond to his voice.